The families who survived the Usindiso Building fire in Marshalltown Johannesburg earlier this year have been moved to shacks built by the city. They join survivors of a previous fire at the Booysens informal settlement who were settled there 2 years ago. These shacks in Denver are meant to be temporary relocation centres, while a longer-term plan is made to shelter the destitute. Socio-Economic Rights Institute of South Africa's Executive Director, Nomzamo Zondo, joins us now. Nomzamo, good evening to you and welcome. There are a lot of views on this relating to safety, suitability, given that these are tin shacks, no electricity, one communal tap and some mobile toilets. What is SERI's view on this?
Good evening, Iman. Thank you so much for inviting us. SERI has been concerned for a long time about the state's response to the victims and the assistance being provided to the victims. So firstly, I think we were concerned, but the fact there wasn't really a coordinated response to assist those who were trying to locate loved ones who had passed away, to assist those who had been hospitalized. And in the shelters themselves, I think there were news reports about attempts to evict people from the shelters, I think just 3 weeks ago. But that came to a sort of a height last week, Wednesday, when the city of Johannesburg arrived at the one shelter that I think accommodated the most people, the Hoffland shelter. They arrived there with police, they arrived with Home Affairs, and the approach wasn't really an approach where they were coming in to relocate the residents. In fact, by the end of that, the South African residents were put in a bus and in trucks to go to Denver, and those who were migrants were informed that they can't move to Hoffland shelter, and those who were undocumented were arrested. About 32 of the victims of the fire were arrested on Wednesday and are currently in Lindela as we speak today. Even in relation, as you speak, to the relocation of the South Africans to the Denver site, that relocation happens in circumstances where the city of Johannesburg hasn't engaged with them meaningfully, has not taken steps to make sure that there's proper access to basic services. So both the city of Johannesburg is fully aware of the emergency housing program, which is the program that the assistance is being provided through. And that program has requirements that at the very least, the unit, the shack or the room must be 24 square meters. It says that at least if there's going to be sharing of ablution facilities, that those must be at least one toilet for every 5 families, that there must be at least one tap for every 25 families. These are minimum requirements that are required from any municipality providing emergency assistance in this manner. And as you've identified yourself, none of those standards have been met.
Nomzamo, let's just go back to the first part that you were sharing with our viewers around, and that is there seems to be no coordinated response, and you have authorities and officials showing up at places where people are without warning. Was that without warning that there would be this move, that they would be relocated, that they should pack up their belongings, that people, who are found to have been undocumented, would face certain consequences?
There was no warning, there was no information. In fact, when the residents' attorneys took the city to court and the other authorities that were involved in this matter, there was an attempt to then evict residents from another shelter, the Impilo shelter, which is managed by MES, on the Friday. And this happened in instances where already the High Court had made it clear that the city of Johannesburg must not act in that way in relation to the 2 remaining shelters, being the Impilo shelter and the Wembley shelter. So in the circumstances of Hoffland shelter, no one knew they were going to be relocated. And in fact, when the city arrived, it came to the property with Operation Dudula. That's what is contained in the residents' papers. It came with Operation Dudula and the police and JMPD, and gates were locked. So it wasn't a situation where people are being assisted and being relocated to their new homes. In fact, it felt more like an attack for the residents, and that's why there is currently legal proceedings that are going to be before the High Court on Thursday on this very issue.
And what would the sum of those legal proceedings be? That the city then conform to this emergency housing program's provisions on how interim housing should be constructed?
So the demand from the residents is that the city was in effect, what was meant to be a relocation and assistance to the victims became an eviction. So the city is being asked to follow the law, that if you are evicting, you follow a process, you have a court order. If they are relocating, that relocation is consensual and it's done with the required respect and dignity of the victims, and that also there is a request for the release of the victims, because in effect what has happened will have an impact on the Usindiso inquiry, because the inquiry is likely to lose witnesses. In the manner the city has approached the provision of housing assistance to the victims means that it's likely that the victims of the fire will be scattered. That in the end, it will be difficult for the commission and its evidence leaders, for parties in the commission to locate the victims and ensure they're able to provide evidence in the commission of inquiry.
Nomzamo, this is so heartbreaking on so many levels, because there are so many dimensions to the story around people who wanted certainty and clarity about the injured, their loved ones, and those that are deceased, at the same time living in conditions of great uncertainty, again against this whole backdrop and other debate in South African society about documented versus undocumented, who has the right to stay, who has the right to leave. Government showing its hand, but they're not doing what its own provisions say it should be doing, and leaving people feeling uncertain. It's interesting, though, that reviews from those previously settled there, for example, from Booysens, when the SA Human Rights Commission went there, said that they were happier to be there than at a communal hall, which is where they'd lived, I think, for about 2 years or so. So just share with us, if you have heard mixed reviews and a mixed picture possibly of how this relocation resettlement policy is working for the individuals who are at the receiving end.
Look, so I mean, almost for everyone, no one, in fact, the policy says people can be in a communal shelter for 72 hours. And between the Department of Social Development and the housing development within the city of Johannesburg, there's meant to be a handover after the 72-hour mark. So in effect, the victims were meant to be in the Hoffland shelter and any of the other 3 shelters for under a week. And then they were meant to move on to temporary accommodation that's elsewhere. So I believe that the victims would have been looking forward to a relocation to Denver, because it would mean that they have space where they can be alone with their families, that they have more control over their lives. And that the treatment that they've received, not only from the authorities, but even from the residents of Bears Valley, would stop, because they would be now in a new environment where they would be welcomed. Having that as the hope for the relocation, and then seeing the reality when the city comes in, not as someone who's here to provide assistance, but as someone who's here to scatter and throw you out, which was the experience that the residents expressed, as we learned from their court papers, and as we also saw in some of the media that reported what happened on the 15th. And really, all this while, I have been surprised at the level of inhumanity. I've been surprised at the fact that the state is not able to respond to people who have gone through this very traumatic experience, as you pointed out, from the families who are trying to find their loved ones, to those who were hospitalized, to those who have been displaced. At every point, the intervention by the state has been lacking in humanity, has been lacking in coordination, and has really been unlawful. And it's really disappointing, because even in terms of the Housing Act, any development is meant to center the people that are going to be served by it. And in fact, that meaningful consultation is expected. And if the city of Johannesburg was going to do this beautiful thing of moving the Usindiso residents from this very uncertain, unhappy, unhealthy conditions at the shelters to something better at Denver, which in any event will probably need to be improved, as we're saying. There's no electricity, there aren't enough water points, probably the sanitation is going to be insufficient. But at the very least, when that move happens, that the people would feel that this is assistance from people who feel their pain, who care for them.
Nomzamo, I've got to leave it there.
We haven't had that.
Got to leave it there. I think the point was well made. And connecting those two pictures, we started our bulletin today, and in fact, one of our biggest stories is the call for humanity that our government is making in Parliament, legitimately for the plight of Palestinians. And at the same time, we're seeing what you are saying is akin to inhumane treatment of people who are the most vulnerable in the aftermath of a tragedy right here on home soil. Thank you for sharing with us tonight. Again, another story we will keep our eyes on. Socio-Economic Rights Institute of South Africa's Executive Director, Nomzamo Zondo.